The first light of dawn spread across the Mekong Delta, turning hundreds of flooded rice paddies into shimmering sheets of gold. A soft mist hovered above the water while the distant calls of herons echoed through the quiet morning. Farmers were already knee-deep in their fields, planting young rice seedlings under the cool embrace of the sunrise. Then, an unfamiliar sound drifted across the valley. Quack, quack, quack. Heads turned. Dozens of snow-white ducks poured through a small bamboo gate, splashing eagerly into one particular rice field. Behind them walked Lin Tran, her weathered conical hat casting a shadow over her calm face as she carried nothing more than a bamboo walking stick. The ducks spread through the flooded paddy, weaving effortlessly between the rows of tender green rice. For a heartbeat, the village fell silent. Then laughter exploded across the fields. "Has she finally lost her senses?" one farmer shouted. Another slapped his thigh, struggling to catch his breath. "She's raising ducks in a rice field. Those birds will destroy every plant before harvest." More farmers abandoned their work to watch. Even children gathered along the narrow dirt path, pointing and laughing as they copied the ducks quacking. "Maybe the ducks are farming now," one boy joked. Lin heard every word. She neither argued nor defended herself. Instead, she watched the ducks for a moment before quietly continuing her morning inspection, as though the laughter belonged to another world. No one in the village realized that this strange scene would soon become the most talked-about story in the entire valley. Because 5 months later, those same farmers would stand outside Lin's gate, not to laugh, but to ask for her help. Lin hadn't always been the woman people whispered about. For years, she had been just another rice farmer trying to make an honest living. Her family's land wasn't large, barely enough to support one household, but it carried generations of memories. Every corner of the field reminded her of the father who had taught her to farm before illness took him away. As a little girl, she had followed him barefoot through these same paddies. He never rushed. He believed the land revealed its secrets only to those patient enough to observe. Whenever insects buzzed above the water or birds circled overhead, he would stop working and simply watch. "Nature is always telling us something," he often said. "Most people are just too busy to listen." Back then, Lin never fully understood what he meant. Now, years later, those words echoed in her mind almost every day. Because farming had changed. Every season seemed harder than the one before. The fertilizer she depended on had nearly doubled in price. Pesticides cost more than ever. Fuel, machinery repairs, and irrigation fees kept climbing, while the price buyers paid for rice barely moved. Each harvest left her with less money than the last. Some nights, she sat alone beneath the dim light of a kerosene lamp, staring at the worn notebook where she recorded every expense. She added the numbers again, then again. The result never changed. If the next harvest failed, she would lose the farm her parents had spent their lives building. The thought tightened her chest. Selling the land wasn't just losing property. It meant letting go of her family's history. She couldn't bear it. A few days later, while visiting the weekly market in a nearby town, Lin noticed a small crowd gathered beneath a faded canvas tent. A handwritten sign read, "Farming more with nature, spending less on chemicals." Curious, she stepped inside. Most of the audience looked unconvinced. A gray-haired agricultural advisor stood beside several photographs pinned to a wooden board. One image immediately caught Lin's attention. It showed dozens of white ducks swimming peacefully through a lush green rice field. Before the advisor could say a word, someone near the back burst into laughter. "Ducks!" Another man shook his head. "What's next?" "Chickens planting the rice." The crowd laughed. The advisor smiled patiently. "They're laughing," he said, "for the same reason people laughed hundreds of years ago." Lin's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. Something about it stirred her curiosity. She had come to the market hoping to find cheaper fertilizer. Instead, she might have just found something that could change everything. The laughter inside the small canvas tent slowly faded as the elderly advisor picked up the photograph. He held it high enough for everyone to see. "These ducks are not here by accident," he said calmly. "They're working." A young farmer near the back scoffed. "Working? They're ducks." The advisor smiled. "Exactly. Ducks don't know they're farming. They simply do what nature created them to do." He pointed to the picture. They eat insects before the insects eat the rice. They hunt young golden apple snails before the snails destroy tender seedlings. As they paddle, they disturb tiny weeds before they take root. And everywhere they go, he paused with a grin, they leave behind natural fertilizer. The room grew quiet. Lin leaned forward. It sounded almost too simple. No expensive chemicals. No complicated machines. Just ducks. The advisor reached beneath the table and placed a weathered notebook in front of the audience. Inside were photographs taken over many years from farms across Asia. Healthy rice fields. Strong harvests. Smiling farmers standing beside flocks of white ducks. This method isn't magic, he continued. It demands patience and careful timing. If you release the ducks too early, they can damage young seedlings. If you release them too late, you'll lose many of the benefits. Farming with nature requires understanding nature. Most people stood up and left before he finished. This old man is dreaming, someone muttered. Another laughed. I'd rather trust pesticides than poultry. Within minutes, only 3 people remained. Lin was one of them. She approached the advisor after the others had gone. Has this really worked? She asked quietly. The old man looked into her eyes. It has worked for generations. He handed her the notebook. Take it. She hesitated. I can't. You need it more than I do. As Lin cycled home that evening, the notebook rested carefully in the basket of her bicycle. She stopped twice along the journey, not because she was tired, but because she couldn't resist opening it again. Every page showed farmers who looked ordinary. They weren't wealthy. They weren't famous. But they had discovered a way to work alongside nature instead of constantly fighting it. By the time she reached home, one thought refused to leave her mind. What if this actually works? For the next several nights, Lin barely slept. She spread the notebook across her kitchen table beside her father's old farming journal. She compared notes, studied sketches, read every handwritten observation. One sentence caught her attention. Healthy fields are ecosystems, not factories. She read it again. Factories depended on constant inputs. Ecosystems depended on balance. It was a completely different way of thinking about farming. Still, there was one enormous problem. She had never seen anyone in the Mekong Delta use ducks this way. If she failed, everyone would know. The following morning, Lin carried her notebook to the village cafe, hoping to hear what the other farmers thought. She barely sat down before someone noticed the photographs. Ducks, one man chuckled. Are you planning to open a restaurant? Another leaned over the table. No, she's trying to save money. The group burst into laughter. One farmer, Bao, was especially loud. Bao owned one of the largest rice farms in the village. He believed bigger machines and stronger chemicals solved every problem. You've been reading fairy tales, he said with a grin. If ducks could grow rice, my grandfather would have been a millionaire. The others laughed again. Bao folded his arms. Listen to me, Lin. If you want advice, buy better pesticides. Don't gamble your family's farm on birds. Lin smiled politely. Thank you for your concern. Bao shook his head. When harvest comes, he pointed toward her notebook. Don't say nobody warned you. The words followed Lin all the way home. That afternoon, she stood alone at the edge of her rice field as a warm breeze rippled across the water. She looked at the young rice seedlings, then at the notebook, then back at the field. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Nature is always telling us something. She took a deep breath. The next morning, she visited a small duck breeder on the edge of the district. The old breeder looked surprised when she asked for 40 ducklings. Starting a duck farm? He asked. Lin smiled. I'm starting an experiment. The man laughed softly. I've heard stranger ideas. He carefully placed 40 fluffy white ducklings into a woven bamboo crate. Their tiny chirps filled the air as Lin loaded the crate onto her small wooden cart. The purchase emptied nearly all the money she had saved for pesticides. If this failed, there would be no second chance. As she pulled the cart through the village, people immediately noticed the chorus of chirping ducklings. Doors opened. Children ran alongside the cart. Neighbors stepped out into the road. What did you buy? Someone called. When they saw the ducklings, the questions turned into laughter. She actually did it. I thought she was joking. Bao walked over, folded his arms, and looked into the crate. "You spent your pesticide money on ducks?" Lin nodded. "I did." He laughed so hard that tears formed in his eyes. "I've seen desperate farmers before, but never one this desperate." The crowd joined him. Some shook their heads with pity. Others whispered that grief had clouded her judgment. One elderly woman quietly said, "Poor Lin. She's about to lose everything." Lin felt every stare, every whisper, every laugh. For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. She looked down at the tiny ducklings huddled together inside the crate. They looked so small, so fragile. Could these little creatures really protect an entire rice field? Or had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? She tightened her grip on the cart and continued walking. Behind her, the laughter echoed through the village. Ahead of her, the future of her family's farm waited in silence. The next morning, before the village had fully awakened, Lin carried the crate to the edge of her flooded rice field. A thin layer of mist floated above the water, and the only sounds were singing birds and the gentle splash of fish beneath the surface. She knelt beside the crate and slowly lifted the lid. For a brief moment, the ducklings hesitated. Then one hopped into the shallow water. Another followed. Within seconds, all 40 ducklings were happily paddling through the rice field, chasing insects and exploring every corner of their new home. Lin smiled. She had no idea that half the village was watching. By sunrise, farmers had gathered along the narrow dirt path beside her field. Some laughed so hard they had to wipe tears from their eyes. Bao stood at the front of the crowd. "So this is your grand plan?" he shouted. "You've hired ducks to farm for you?" The crowd erupted with laughter. Lin looked up, smiled politely, and returned to her work. She had learned something from her father years ago. Never argue with people who have already decided you're wrong. Let time answer them. The days turned into weeks. Every morning, the ducks eagerly entered the flooded paddies. They darted between the rice plants, constantly searching for insects, tiny snails, and fresh weed shoots. Lin watched carefully. The ducks rarely touched the rice itself. Instead, they seemed completely focused on everything that threatened it. Still, the laughter never stopped. Children quacked whenever she passed through the village. Neighbors called her the duck lady. Even at the local market, people whispered behind her back. One evening, after another day of ridicule, Lin sat alone outside her small wooden house. For the first time since buying the ducks, doubt began to overwhelm her. "What if Bao was right?" she whispered. "If this fails, I'll lose everything." She looked toward the rice field, now glowing beneath the moonlight. The ducks rested quietly along the water's edge. Then she remembered the words her father had spoken countless times. "When you're unsure, don't listen to the loudest voices. Listen to the field." The next morning, she walked into her rice paddy with fresh determination. As she gently parted the leaves, something caught her attention. The rice looked healthier than she had expected. There were very few insect bites, almost no weeds. The water smelled fresh, not chemical. Dragonflies hovered above the surface. Tiny frogs had returned to the field. Life seemed to be thriving. She smiled. Maybe, just maybe, the ducks were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. 2 weeks later, dark clouds gathered across the Mekong Delta. Heavy rain poured for 3 straight days. The canals overflowed. Water rushed through the rice fields, carrying insects and golden apple snails from farm to farm. When the storm finally passed, panic spread through the village. Farmers discovered thousands of snails feeding on young rice plants. Brown plant hoppers covered entire sections of fields. The village store sold every bottle of pesticide within hours. Backpack sprayers worked from sunrise until sunset. But the insects kept coming. Bao sprayed once, then twice, then a third time. Still, his rice began turning yellow. Across the valley, worried farmers stood helplessly as weeks of hard work disappeared before their eyes. Then someone noticed something strange. Lin's field looked different. While surrounding paddies showed patches of damage, hers remained a deep, healthy green. People gathered along the canal. The ducks continued moving through the water exactly as they had every day before the storm. They chased insects. They swallowed young snails. They pecked at fresh weeds. without anyone realizing it. They had become the field's natural protectors. One afternoon, Bao quietly crossed the small bamboo bridge separating his land from Lin's. Gone was the confident smile he had worn all season. He stood silently for several minutes before speaking. "You haven't sprayed?" Lin shook her head. "Not once." He looked around the field in disbelief. "I don't understand." She pointed toward the ducks. They never stopped working. Bao watched as one duck quickly swallowed 3 tiny snails in less than a minute. Another chased a cluster of insects hiding beneath a rice leaf. For the first time all season, he wasn't laughing. He was learning. Harvest season arrived beneath brilliant blue skies. Golden rice stretched across the valley like an endless sea. Families gathered before sunrise as harvesters rolled into the fields. Everyone hoped for good news. Everyone feared disappointment. Lin stood quietly beside her rice paddy as the machine began cutting through the first rows. The engine hummed steadily. Golden grain poured into the collection bin. The operator climbed down, scooped up a handful of rice, and smiled. "This is one of the best harvests I've seen this year." Word spread almost instantly. Farmers left their own fields and hurried toward Lin's. They watched trailer after trailer fill with heavy, healthy grain. Across the canal, many fields produced only a fraction of what had been expected. But there was one more surprise. After the rice harvest, local buyers arrived to purchase her ducks. Restaurants wanted healthy, naturally raised birds. Families wanted breeding pairs. Her duck eggs, collected throughout the season, had already become popular at the village market. For the first time in years, Lin earned income from 2 harvests instead of 1. Rice and ducks. She paid off her remaining debts. She repaired the roof of her parents' old home. And for the first time in many years, she slept peacefully. A week later, there was another knock at her gate. When Lin opened it, she found Bao standing there. Behind him were several other farmers. The same people who had laughed the loudest. Bao removed his straw hat. For a long moment, he couldn't find the words. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong." The others nodded. "We all were." He looked toward the ducks, now gliding peacefully through the flooded field. "Would you teach us?" Lin looked at each familiar face. She remembered every joke, every whisper, every moment they had made her feel alone. She could have reminded them of it. She could have turned them away. Instead, she smiled. "My father taught me something long ago," she said. "He believed the land provides enough for everyone who is willing to learn from it. So let's learn together." The following season, something remarkable happened. It wasn't just Lin's field that echoed with cheerful quacks at sunrise. One by one, ducks appeared in rice paddies throughout the village. Then neighboring villages began adopting the same practice. The laughter that had once filled the valley was replaced by curiosity, cooperation, and hope. And every morning, as the first light shimmered across the Mekong Delta, white ducks glided peacefully through the flooded fields. A quiet reminder that sometimes the world's greatest ideas are not the newest ones. Sometimes, they're the ones people laughed at first. Because the richest harvest doesn't always belong to the farmer who spends the most. It belongs to the one who understands that nature can be the greatest partner of all.